The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Welcome to Meet the Author. My name is Joe Nash. Today we're talking to Ed Chevrette. He's having a return visit here. I'll talk about that in a second, but his book is called Wings of Fortune. The subtitle is Personal Tales from the Golden Age of Aviation. Ed is a local pilot. He was for many years. Started out at the Loudon Airport. We'll find out where that was in a second. And also, the book is 10 years old, and the book is still in print, so welcome back, Ed.
Thank you.
I should say, your book is self-published by the Troy Bookmakers. Most self-published books, they're published, they do a printing, and you never hear of them again. Your book, and you were one of the first guests we ever had on our station here. 10 years later, your book is still in print, you're still selling copies, and you've had quite the adventure, so welcome back.
Thank you. Good to be back.
So, Loudon Airport, I think some people might not even know, where was Loudon Airport?
Loudon Airport was just off of Route 9, south of the Crescent Bridge. It was near, I'm just trying to remember now, there's a...
You go past where the town landfill is?
Just before the town landfill.
Before? Okay.
Just before that. In fact, it was adjacent to the town landfill. Okay,
and then you started there in, late 50s?
1959.
1959. Now, your book is filled with all kinds of, I have to say, after rereading parts of it again, it sounds like it was a golden age for you. You were also one of the youngest people to get their pilot's license. Is that what it was? And why don't you start with this? Talk about the Loudon Airport and when you started, and also when you got your first solo flight. You weren't even you were still training, and they said it's time to go up. You didn't even know. So tell us that little story and how you started out at the Loudon and why you went over there and everything.
Well, I started at the Loudon Airport because I always was interested in flying. And I had an opportunity to start taking flying lessons. And
you were 16, right?
I was just barely turned 16.
And I should say, there's a funny little thing in the book. After you get your license, you say, "Oh, now it's time to get my driver's license."
I had soloed. It was, I think it was September 20th, 1959, and it was a very nice day. And I had not expected it, which is a testament to my instructor, because he told me, "Well, it'll be about 3 weeks before you solo."
By the way, just go back to where it started, how you got started. And you went over there.
I just went over there and just started. I took my first lesson, and at that time I had a lawn mowing business, and I was delivering newspapers, and I also made a deal with the operator at the airport to work at the airport for flying time, and that's how I got started.
Okay. And
started with the first lesson, and I soloed after 8.5 hours.
8.5 hours?
8.5 hours.
And then I think you recount in your book, you thought it was just going to be another lesson, but they said, no, you're going to do your solo?
Yeah, I thought it was just going to be another lesson. It was a nice day. We were out shooting some takeoffs and landings, and the instructor said, "Pull it over." And I looked at him, and he got out of the front seat. He tied down the seatbelt in the front seat, and he said, "Okay, so I want you to take this thing around and bring it down here." I signed my student pilot certificate and said, "Go."
So your book recounts, and I should tell people it's a wonderful book. It recounts going from a student to your private pilot's license to your commercial license, and you ultimately became a flight instructor. So why do you call it, and I got to say, in the first half of the book is about the Loudon Airport days, and you gave me this little map, all these little airports. Why don't you name some of these, because you said none of these are around anymore. Where do you got the Brunswick, or name some of these.
Loudon Airport's no longer around. Troy Airport is no longer here. East Greenbush is no longer here.
Okay.
And those were basically at that time, Round Lake Airport's no longer around.
Okay. So why do you call it a golden age?
Golden Age, people were really getting into private aviation at that time.
This is late 50s, early 60s.
Late 50s, early 60s, and the manufacturers such as Piper, Cessna, and Beech, they started producing airplanes, mass production. And people were getting more interested in flying, and they also found out that they were making airplanes a little bit faster now, and we could get places faster. You know, New York and Boston were only an hour away with some of the airplanes we had.
Was it more, back then, was it more affordable?
It was more affordable, and businessmen were finding out that they could spend less time in the air to get to where they had to go to take care of the business than if they took the airlines.
Oh, okay. So talk about, one of the best parts of the book is hanging around the hangar. And you were a kid, kind of, but all these stories of these older guys, it just sounds like it was, and it was really kind of fun, actually.
It was. The camaraderie was something else. And of course, when you're first starting out, you're getting a lot of ribbing from everybody else. A lot of encouragement also. And most of them were all accomplished pilots, and they were fascinated watching me as I progressed from where they had been with my goal to be a commercial pilot. And I can remember one particular time, in fact, it's in the book, it was big to put a radio in your airplane and go to the Albany airport.
So you could communicate?
So you could communicate. And in those days, there's not too many airplanes with radios. And in order to do that, you had to get a permit, your radio operator telephone permit. And I can remember that one day that I was going over with my instructor, and they were questioning me on the phonetic alphabet and make sure that I knew what they were, like A for Alpha, B for Bravo. And they were kidding me, and they finally said, okay, what is your initials? EC. It says Echo Charlie. And for a while, Echo Charlie was my nickname around the airport. Unfortunately, it didn't stick too long.
Okay. So talk about, if you can, a little bit, one of the best things about your book, and I mentioned this when you were here 10 years ago, you wrote this book in the first person, which really adds, I don't know, something to it. Most memoirs are written, in the past, I did this, I did that, everything was. You've written it almost like in the present tense. Talk about why you chose to do that, and I got to just help for people watching. It really makes the book so much better than your typical memoir. It really put it up a notch for me.
Well, I wanted to, first I wanted to be more unique than just a regular memoir.
Yeah.
And what I did is I put myself back in the days as a flight instructor, and I decided if I write this in the first person, I want the person who's reading the book to actually experience what I'm talking about.
Yes, you do get a sense of that. You say, I walk into the terminal, I do this. It sounds like, you're not recounting it. It sounds like you're actually doing it. Okay.
And that's what makes the book very interesting.
Yeah. So one of the more poignant stories in the book, we could talk about a little bit in the beginning, after getting your license and all the guys, you sort of become one of the guys, sort of. There was this thing with one of the pilots crashes. It's very moving. Talk about that incident, if you could.
And that particular, it was one of my friends. He was one of the people at the airport who kept encouraging me to get all the ratings I can, because my goal was to become a professional pilot, and he wanted me to. And it was very sad that particular day, because he seemed to be the type who was very safety conscious. And he had taken off from Loudon Airport going to, I believe it was Beverly, Massachusetts, and never showed up. And that was in August of, I believe, 61, something like that. He was later found by accident in.
And all the guys, you guys all went over there.
We went over to see what we could salvage, and it was a pretty sad sight because the airplane was damaged beyond control. He was found, I believe, about 4 months after the accident. And unfortunately, we can only speculate what happened. We don't know if maybe he had a heart attack or if he lost control of the airplane. We don't know. We do know that the weather did go bad on him. But that was a year before the National Transportation Safety Board was formed, so there was no official
They didn't go around and investigate.
There was no official record as to what happened, but I was 17 years old, and I'd lost my very first friend.
It's a very moving part of the book. So what is it, because this was your career, and I'm glad to see your uniform still fits you, which is very nice that you're wearing. But you obviously went on to become a commercial pilot and a flight instructor. What is it about flying? Because in your book, you give a good sense of, I think we talked about this last time, the Saint-Exupéry writes about almost the mystical aspects of flying. What is it about flying that made you do it at age 16 and until you had eye problems, you flew? What is it about flying that...
It's very alluring. It's hard to explain, and it's one of those things that's even harder to resist. But once you get started flying, there's a feeling of freedom. There's a great feeling of accomplishment, and you're doing something that at that time not many people have done. And it's very hard to explain. But
it's almost like. It's not explainable. Is that what you're trying to
It's just about not explainable.
But it also comes through in your book. You are free and everything, but you're so dependent on, the machine, on the guys who work on it, the mechanics and everything. So talk a little bit about that. How important all that is.
The mechanics are very important because you're dependent on the airplane. You're dependent on yourself. And a lot of people don't realize is that the maintenance that's required on an airplane is a lot different than that required on an automobile. And the man who works on the airplane has to be licensed not only to work on the airframe but the engine. So there's two separate licenses that he must hold to do this. If you have an aircraft that's used for commercial operations, you're looking at every 100 hours the airplane's inspected.
Every 100 hours?
Every 100 hours of flying time, plus you have an annual inspection on the airplane.
Oh, okay.
If you do something...
that's way more than a car.
Oh, yeah. Well, the airlines have what they call a progressive maintenance program. When I was over at Post and Kill, the mechanic we had 7 single-engine airplanes and 1 twin, and we had written a progressive maintenance program for all of them.
Okay.
So that meant every 25 hours the airplane's being looked at. And what you're also required to do is before each flight, the pilot is required to do a pre-flight. Make sure the airplane's in flyable condition, the amount of gas, the oil.
Okay.
And that's required before each flight. Not every day, but each flight.
So one thing in the beginning of the book and up till when you're training and everything, there's several instances, and then later on when you're flying, there's several instances where you recount the engine just cutting out. What is that like? I can't...
It can be a very sinking feeling. We can laugh about it here, but up in the air it's not so funny. I sat down one day with some of my family members and went through my log books. And
you've kept all your log books through the years?
I kept my log books over the years, and once you get over the initial surprise of the engine quitting, then you're going to have to go through, see if you can restart it. You have to keep the airplane flying. If it's a single-engine airplane, you're going to have to keep it flying and look for a place to land. Multi-engine airplanes, you're a little bit luckier because you have another engine to rely on.
Okay.
But this is part of your training. This is not something that all of a sudden happens, you decide, what am I going to do now?
Well, it's right, because in the book you talk about someone brought you up and they cut the motor out on you, right?
We used to do that for fun in the Cub.
Jeez.
Which on a Sunday afternoon, there's a lot of people around. It was a nice day. My instructor and I get up in the Cub, and we go to the Cub is basically nothing more than a glider with an engine on it.
Oh, yeah.
with 2 people and 12 gallons of gas, the Cub only weighs the gross weight of 1,200 pounds.
Oh, okay.
So we used to get to 2,000 feet, slow it down, turn the ignition off, and we used to shoot dead stick spot landings for Coca-Colas. And so
You mean try to land with the motor, like
Yeah.
gliding?
yeah, we take and pick a spot on the runway, and whoever did the best job of a dead stick spot landing was the one who got the free Coke.
Well, it sounds like it was actually, for all the seriousness, it sounds like it was a kind of fun to be doing.
It was to a point, because I looked over my career as a pilot after these
early
Loudon
days.
Airport. We had counted a total of 7 engine failures and 5 forced landings I had experienced over my lifetime, and I'm here to talk about it.
Oh, these are later on. Yeah, okay. Wow. So the second half of your book, you talk about being a commercial pilot. Why don't you talk a little bit about what that was like and some of your adventures?
We were talking about this before we came in here. After I got my commercial pilot's license, I think I was 19 years old.
So your first paid job was 50 cents. Like, tell that.
I took a 10-minute passenger ride, and afterwards they said, "Well, seeing you're a commercial pilot," which you had to have. We had commercial pilot to take a
take
passenger
people
ride,
out.
and I was paid 50 cents, and I probably should have taken a hint at that point.
But you ended up having a long career as a
Yes.
commercial pilot. One of the stories in your book, I'm trying to remember from the last time I read this. There was a story where you helped someone land in a was it a snow or a sleet storm?
It was an ice storm.
An ice storm. You on the radio with the person, or you flew next to them. Can you tell that little story again?
Well, we had some weather that came in. Nobody knew was coming in. We had a sudden ice storm. And I was out with a commercial student in one of the airplanes, and we ran into this. So we turned around, went back, and we decided we were going to go into Schenectady to clean the ice off the airplane. And while we were there, I started talking to some other pilots. Anybody going westbound? I said, "You better get another briefing because we just ran into sleet and freezing rain."
Okay. So you're out training, and you saw the. Okay.
I'm going to head back to Post and Kill, and coming out of Schenectady, there's 2 airplanes ahead of me, and one was a young student pilot, and I overheard her tell the tower that she was headed to Rochester, New Hampshire. She was on her long solo cross country.
She was by herself.
By herself.
Okay.
And I try to keep monitoring her, and by the time I get over to Post and Kill, I had lost her, and then just before I landed at Post and Kill, I'm going to try one more time to see if Albany might be helping her out, because she had mentioned the fact that her transponder wasn't operating, and that, without going into too much detail, the transponder allows radar to pick up an aircraft in heavy precipitation. Otherwise, a primary target may not be picked out. I heard her. She was in trouble in the precipitation, but she was headed back to Albany, and Albany could not pick her up. And I heard her say she's over a body of water with a bridge over it. Well, that sounded like the Tomahawk Reservoir.
Oh, okay.
So we went up alongside. I went up to the Tomahawk Reservoir with my student, and I found her. And I literally pulled up alongside of her. And I was right alongside of her, and I started talking to her. And, of course, while I'm talking to her, trying to get her back into Albany, I'm talking to Albany radar, because the transponder of my aircraft was working. And
So Albany was able to pick you up.
Albany able to pick us up.
Oh, okay.
And the storm increased in intensity. We started picking up some ice pretty bad, to the point that you couldn't see out the windshield. Of course, the wings and everything else in the airplane's picking up ice. And she got panicky. And, I mean, that'd make your blood run cold when you hear somebody screaming into the microphone that they can't see. So I yelled back, calm down. I want you to dress off of me. I want you to calm down, use your instruments, and myself will get you back into Albany. And fortunately, she was able to compose herself, because it's kind of hard to deal with somebody when you're not sitting alongside them in a situation like that. I later found out that other people had monitored the frequency, and local fire and police departments were notified, because at the rate of ice, the ice was accumulating on the airplane. We were not sure we were going to make it.
And your plane too?
And my plane too.
Okay.
And the only thing that I kept saying to myself is that with the weather flying experience I had before, I knew that in the freezing rain there had to be warm air someplace. We could climb, but right now we didn't have really the capability to climb because of the ice that was on both airplanes. I'd stuck with this one controller, and he was monitoring us all the way in, and we were fortunate enough. We got to the point where both airplanes were losing altitude, and I was trying to find a place to put them in. And fortunately enough, we had hit a pocket of warm air, and the temperature rose just enough that we were able to shed the ice on both airplanes and land. And this is quite a story in the area for quite some time. And I talked to the air traffic controllers, and I talked to flight service, and even ended up in the FAA office. And I told them, I said, nobody had forecast this, and nobody gave us any idea this was coming. It just happened, and we had to do what we had to do. And the ironic thing about it was, one of the inspectors asked me, he kind of looked at me in the corner of his eyes, he said, "I don't think that airplane of yours is licensed to fly into known icing conditions." And I said, "It isn't." By going back after the girl, even though I saved her life, I did break the regulations. Because the airplane was not licensed to fly into that conditions. And I says, "Well, what do you want me to do about it?" He says, "Goodbye. Go home."
Well, I just tell people, your book is filled with these kind of stories, serious, some funny, but hanging out at the Loudon Airport days. But why don't you talk now? Your book's been out for 10 years. It's still in print, like I mentioned in the beginning. What has the response to your book been? Because you were a flight instructor, and since the book came out, over the last 10 years, you've heard from people literally all over the country that have somehow found their way to your book. And talk a little bit about the response the last 10 years.
The response has been unbelievable. I was invited over to, I've done a lot of presentations and book signings, and I was asked to go over to a presentation over to Post and Kill one time. And I walked into their town hall, and the town hall seats 41 people. I walked into that town hall, and it was standing room only. And the very first person I walked into was a student I hadn't seen in over 25 years. In fact, he's in the book.
So the book has put you in touch with a lot of your former.
Yes.
Of course, this is the days before email and everything. Now, are you in touch with a lot of your old?
Oh yes.
Well, that must be very nice.
Well, when the book came out, then it went on the Troy Bookmakers. They had a site on, they're selling the book. And on the Troy Bookmakers site, for quite a while, it was the top 10 bestseller and the #1 best-selling memoir. And all of a sudden, I turn around and I see on the website, it picked up 2 5-star written reviews. And I look at one of them, and it's one of my ex-ROTC students that I had over at RPI.
This is an Amazon review?
No, I'm still.
On Bookmakers?
This is Bookmakers.
Oh, okay.
It turns around that he at that time was captain on a 757 for UPS.
Oh, okay.
So we started emailing back and forth, and we had a very nice reunion one afternoon down at Jack's Restaurant in downtown Albany. I hadn't seen him in something like 35 years.
And it's all because of the book?
Because of the book.
Wow.
Then we go on Amazon.com as ebook, and it also is printed book, and it picked up 5 more 5-star written reviews.
And did you know any of the reviewers?
Yes, three of them were people I had flown with. In fact, that one picture I had sent you with that airplane at Loudon Airport, well, the gentleman who was sitting in that airplane, I had a reunion with him because of the book and because of this website that the book is now on.
What is that website?
I have a website called Abandoned Little Known Airfields.
Abandoned and Little Known Airfields?
Yes.
Okay.
Paul and Terry Freeman, and I sent an email to the guy, and he sent this back to me.
Okay.
And the next thing I know, that has the Loudon Airport.
Yeah, this has all the old airports in our area from back in your day.
The one pilot who saw the information in the book, sent me that picture that I sent to you. He was the one who read the book because of that site.
All right.
So
you're hearing from people all over. What are they saying about the book? What's the main response been?
It's basically what you said. The way it was written, in the first person.
Yes, I totally, we're very unique. I can't believe more authors don't do that.
And they also, I talked to one gentleman yesterday. He says, Ed, you brought back so many, so many memories, which is very nice. And
so what kind of groups do you still speak to? Retired groups or
retired groups?
Old airport people groups?
After the book came out, I was invited to join the QBs, which is a national pilots organization. And I ran into pilots that I hadn't seen in 40 years.
And that they, again, how is the word spread about your book? Is it they just emailing each other? How did it spread?
I have
I
have a son down in Pennsylvania, and there was one of his customers happened to mention one time. He asked him, "Do you know this guy who wrote this book?" He says, "That's my father."
Oh, because the same.
Yeah,
same
he
name.
says, "Well, he says that book is advertised in every aviation magazine and every aviation article in the world."
Okay, and do you know who did that?
I have no idea. I did this just for my family and friends for the last 6 months, and here we are in our 10th year, or started our 10th year, and it's on the website. If you Google that or Yahoo that, at one point there was a page and a half of information on me and the book.
Okay.
And I have no idea where it came from.
So you can get maybe one of your fans from...
You never know.
So you can get the book on Amazon. They have it as both a regular book like this and an ebook. And can you also get it through Troy Bookmakers?
You can get it through the Troy Bookmakers. They will mail it to you.
Okay.
You can also, Barnes & Noble, you can get the Nook version.
A Nook version. Okay, that's an ebook. So what, maybe to sum things up, obviously you didn't foresee the success of the book. What's been the best thing to come out of, besides reunions with all your former students? What's been the best thing about writing the book?
I think it's a lot of satisfaction knowing that it brought a lot of enjoyment to a lot of people.
I mean, a lot of people that are maybe around your age that learned to fly like you did up, in the late 50s, early.
I was at one of my brother's daughters got married here beginning of the summer, and I was at the reception, and there's a young fellow, 16 years old, who's just started to fly, come up and introduced himself, and of course now he's a member of the family by marriage, but he had to sit down and talk to me because my brother told him I was a pilot and had written the book. And I've been to car shows where I've walked up to, I see some of these cars, you look inside and I see a copy of my book in the seat.
Really?
And it's just unreal.
Well, that is...
I've had some reviews written on the book of people I've never heard of before who aren't even pilots who give it a 5-star written review.
Yeah. Well, this is wonderful. I should say, because I remember you in the library, the book came out in 2007. You wrote this book in our library. Before, we only had, I think, 1 or 2 internet terminals.
Yeah.
We had 2 terminals that were only for typing stuff, no internet. That's how long ago.
That's right.
And you wrote it here, and you've had so much success, and we're really happy for you that you came back, and the 10-year anniversary. The library also has a couple copies of this book if you want to come in and check it out. I'll put them down there. Thanks for the gift here. So it's Wings of Fortune. Really, really nice stories of the early days of Ed's flying career, the golden age, Loudon Airport, and all the small airports, and a wonderful book, very well written. And so I wish you continued success, Ed.
Thank you very much.
And thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you again next time on Meet the Author.